across the energy field that looked like raster on a black and white TV set, the squiggle of energy going back and forth at 3-inch intervals looked more like a whitish blue color. And the engineers working for DARPA had no clue what this device did. And one day when they had the energy field on, one of the projects walked through the energy field to retrieve a screwdriver on a bench across the shop floor. And I know that this is how the technology derived, or the understanding of what this device did, because this was part of our training when I became attached to Project Pegasus. We had practical field training at the different project locations that supplemented what we were getting on these speed learning machines called kistoscopes that I've linked to the Office of Naval Research. And what we were told is that when he walked through the energy field to get the screwdriver, he found himself apparently tumbling forward and tumbling sort of directly at the same time. It felt like he was tumbling forward, but he found himself moving through a vortal tunnel in the fabric of time-space. And the only way I can describe this as having somebody who experienced it many times in childhood is it's kind of like the near-death experience. You find yourself moving at a great rate of speed through an illuminated tunnel, a tunnel that has sort of opened up in front of you, and you can kind of see this event horizon that moves towards a pinprick of light in the distance, but you're kind of in this tunnel of light, and you feel like you're moving forward, but you also feel like you're moving still. You feel like you're moving directly forward, but you also feel like you're falling forward on your face. It's a very strange environment. The closest thing I can describe it to would be dramatizations of people's near-death experiences in the so-called tunnel of light. It was a tunnel, and it was illuminated, but it was illuminated with weird patterns that, at least partially with weird patterns that kind of looked like those phosphine things you get in your eyes when you press your eyeball. You get these weird psychedelic patterns. There were these weird psychedelic patterns in this tunnel, but you still sensed that you were in a specific environment of light. And if you looked at the side of the tunnel, you saw all this stuff rushing past you. So it was kind of like being sped up in reality and having the whole universe sort of zip past your face.
What was rushing past your face on the walls of the tunnel? Like, what things do you remember seeing?
Well, one time I remember as we were jumping from Woodridge, New Jersey, which is where Curtiss Wright was located, to the state capitol complex in Santa Fe, I looked at the wall of the tunnel and I saw like a farmer in Kansas or something, like looking through the wall of the tunnel at us like something had just zipped in front of his face. So I think sometimes the tunnel might have even been appearing on the surface. I know based on one of my fact-finding trips to New Mexico that people have captured anomalous photographs in the state capitol complex in Santa Fe that look like tunnels or linear light patterns that may have been an after effect from what was happening. It was kind of like going through the quantum hologram and seeing that it had multiple internested dimensions embedded in it. So it was basically these light patterns of random events just going past you.
Various different timelines, too, and probabilities, right? Everything that could happen.
I believe so. So, like, if you're moving forward, you felt like you were falling into a dark tunnel. But if you look to the side, you could see these wavy bands of, like, black and white light, like if you were looking at different TV sets. And it was all rushing by very quickly, and you would see different people, places, and events just zipping past the wall. You're moving forward, and you're seeing these illuminated dimensions of different little tableaus of events going on the side of the tunnel. Sometimes I could make it out. Sometimes it just looked like wavy light. And that's what happened when you jump through the device. Now, I first jumped through the device, we know, sometime between 1967 and 68. Because after we popped into view in Santa Fe, and my dad told me, I told you to stay in one place because I've just spent the last hour and a half trying to find you here. Because we ended up in different locations in Santa Fe, when basically the tunnel would just sort of, you'd see the pinprick of light would suddenly get bigger, and suddenly you popped into view in some other location. There was no device on the receiving end. And so the first time that I can remember, at least, I may have gone in as a 4-year-old, but I know I jumped through the device when I was a 6-year-old between September of 67 and September of 68, because my dad got a car there at the state capitol complex in Santa Fe, and we drove over for a meeting with Dr. Harold M. Agnew when he was director of the W Division, which is the weapons division at the Los Alamos National Labs. Well, why is this significant? Well, that's where Tesla's papers were sent. The true history of American time travel research is that when Tesla died in 1943, his time travel technologies, which allow the quantum access of which the 21st century will be built, were weaponized. And they've been kept as official state secrets in the bomb factory at the Los Alamos National Labs. Because when we met with Agnew in his office at Lamel, I know from investigating his biography that he was not yet the director of the labs. He was the director of the weapons division. And we know this took place between September of 1967 and 68, because during that meeting, he asked my father how old I was, and my father and I both said simultaneously 6. Okay, so we can date the meeting to that time frame. Another significant thing that was said during that meeting, my father was basically showing me teleportation, but that particular trip was to bring a prospectus to Dr. Agnew. Dr. Agnew, I would later find in my project experiences, was sort of playing the role of the federal science administrator over Project Pegasus. He was at the Los Alamos National Labs. The teleport that we were using to get back to New Jersey, however, was at the Sandia National Laboratory, adjacent to the Kirtland Air Force Base near Albuquerque, New Mexico. But Agnew was scrutinizing this prospectus that my dad had written, I believe to involve civilians, including children, in the teleportation experiments that were then underway, because there was a discussion about what the prospectus held. And I remember that Dr. Agnew challenged the budget that my dad had written up, and my dad said too low, and he said no, too high. And Agnew also mentioned that they didn't want any receipts for expensing because they didn't want a paper trail.
What a thing to use that technology for weapons, of all the things it could be used for.
Right, see, this is one of the reasons I'm speaking out, is because Tesla's papers were never lost. In fact, Tesla's papers have been quarantined. They've been sequestered within the U.S. Defense Department as potential weapons, and they were never liberated to advantage human beings. Imagine the world that could evolve in the 21st century if you could go to a teleport at Grand Central Station in New York and jump through it and arrive at Union Station in Los Angeles several seconds later. Imagine the billions of tons of polluting gases and particulates that wouldn't be put into the atmosphere, even from plane flights, if we had adopted teleportation when it first emerged in practical terms in 1970 timeframe. That is to say, I'm just dating that based on the decade. I know that we were doing several years before that, but certainly by 1970 we could have had an operational civilian transportation infrastructure founded on, or based on teleportation. Now, why do I know that's the case? Because in this discussion between my dad and I, when I was 6, 1967, 68 time frame, they had a discussion about teleportation, and my father said to Agnew, have you tried it yet? And Agnew said, no, but I want to. And from that, I draw the implication that, I draw the inference that teleportation as an operational technology had just emerged around that time, because my father had done it. He had just involved his youngest son in it to show the director of the weapons division at the labs that if it was safe for his 5th, and youngest child, it was safe for anybody's child. It should be used in the civilian sector. And when they had this back and forth about the technology, it was clear that the technology had just emerged as a practical matter, and that Agnew hadn't even tried it yet. So I think that establishes not only that this particular trip establishes not only a time when we know that teleportation had already been achieved and was operational, but also probably indicates the time that it actually emerged. Because if it had emerged much earlier, Agnew would have already tried it. Now, who was Agnew? Agnew was the prize pupil of the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago when the atomic pile there went critical. He was also at Los Alamos and Alamogordo when the atomic bomb was designed and tested, and he was in the chase plane, the Great Artiste, when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, during World War II. So Agnew, in fact, was a significant figure in American science history and the history of technical development in the 20th century. He was the only person present at 3 critical stages of the Manhattan Project, namely when atomic fission was achieved, the criticality effect, and